I'll tell you, it's amazing. So, I'm Dr. Schiller, and I want to share a bit from my perspective about this suffering process that I've been, I guess, privileged and honored and had the privilege of escorting people on. There's a suffering process and there's a healing process. And my world of practice has been working with people who've been through various catastrophes like trauma and really serious acute illnesses, people who've been hospitalized, who've been in horrible accidents, who've had surgeries that went wrong, who've been in intensive care for a month, the whole spectrum of, oh my gosh, please let it never happen to anybody. That's been my work for over 20 years, and I've brought the sensibilities and training of a Harvard-trained doctor together with my own process and inner process, and around 30 years of doing inner work, of healing work, of learning natural healing for my own life and for the people that I work with and the people that I serve. And so I speak from a place of how do we integrate the best of conventional medicine with natural healing? How do we take a grounded scientific understanding, and how do we also incorporate a wisdom and an intelligence that allows us to evoke the healing that lives in potential in the soul and the body of every person? Now I'm going to get my microphone and bring it a little closer because you might not be able to hear this. One moment. So the title of this conversation is Making Peace with Negative Emotions and Healing Trauma and Healing Pain as a result of that. The reason this is so important is because most of us aren't conditioned or trained or acculturated to being wise in relationship with our emotions. Most of us are trained to either stuff it and don't feel anything, or conditioned to fall into it and get absorbed into the vortex. And the reason why this is so important is because your emotions are built into every cell of your body. Your emotional reality, whether you're aware and conscious, whether you're in denial, whether you're sucked into the vortex, your emotional experience is coloring all of your biology and all of your biochemistry and all of your neurochemistry. And we know that negative emotional states are associated with so many different kinds of issues. We know that from clinical experience of talking with thousands and thousands of people. And when I'm sensitive to it, and when I learn to listen and ask the questions, hearing the people who were stuck in their physical trauma and their physical illness and their physical pain, and underneath the surface frequently there was a degree of distress, of emotional distress, of existential distress that was in part driving their suffering. And in the past 10 or 20 years, we've had exponential growth in research showing us that, these things really matter, that there's a number of pathways by which negative emotional experiences can make things worse and make you suffer more. One aspect is purely biological. Well, let me take a step back from that because there's nothing purely biological. One aspect is mainly biological. It's measurable. We can measure that negative emotional states attached to sensory experiences, attached to physical illnesses, can do things like amplify pain transmission, amplify inflammation, create hormonal changes, create a whole set of biological changes, turn on danger detection pathways on a cellular level that influences immune cells, and whether the immune cells are recognizing your body as your body and the bad guys as the bad guys, or if your immune cells are getting confused about that and either generating autoimmune disease or just creating an overabundant immune response that drives chronic illness, that drives chronic pain. So these are some of the ways where your emotional experience, whether it's conscious or unconscious, whether you're in denial and just I'm going to tough it out and be a tough guy, underneath that, your biology is responding. And if you're caught up in falling into the vortex and the stream of difficult emotional experience, then frequently what happens is it can amplify those biological factors. Or it could be that you're protected from them to a certain extent because you're releasing whatever's going on emotionally and you're letting it move through you. But on the other hand, in some situations, if we're really sucked into a re-stimulation of an old traumatic pattern, or if you're sucked into an overwhelming emotion, and what you're experiencing is being flooded with emotion, with pain, with fear, with a whole vortex of difficult stuff, then that can create a biology that's not so good for you. And it can also lead to a situation where you're just not able to do the things you need to do, to function, to go forward, to recover, to reclaim your life, to get back to living. And so what I'm out to share with you and suggest to you has to do with really finding the middle ground. Finding a middle ground in which you are conscious and aware, but you're working intelligently with your emotional experience, where you're getting the benefit of emotion, because your emotions are there to serve you. Why do we have emotions? It's not so that we can be a rough, tough guy not feeling anything, or someone who's sucked into trauma and miserable and sad and overwhelmed with a negative emotion all the time. We have emotions to serve us, to enable us to relate with more fluidity and connection to life around us. We've got burgeoning research, that means growing research, showing us how emotional intelligence actually helps people make better decisions. It helps them be better leaders. It can help them work more effectively under stressful circumstances. Emotion is emotion. It's what enables motion. It's what potentially empowers you to do the things you care about and be the person you want to be in the world. And so it's really a question of how do we do this wisely? I'm going to share a biological model, but I want to be clear that the biological model is not separate from the intellectual, emotional, spiritual model. I come from a Torah tradition where, it's a wisdom tradition for all the peoples of the world. And one of the fundamental premises when you look at the totality of it is that there is not a separation between body, between embodied soul, between the emotional soul, the intellectual soul, and the higher aspects of ourself that most people never really touch consciously. But that there is a unity of all of that, and that living a full life is enhanced by our ability to unify those parts of ourselves. That your inner experience, catalyzed by your emotions, mobilized by your higher intellect and your spiritual self, can actually mobilize and help you heal. And it doesn't have to be a liability. It becomes an actual source of strength and a source of transformation. So let's get a little biological though, because we do have science and biology that we learn from biochemistry, we learn from functional brain scanning, we learn from the past few decades of science that have identified two really fundamental functions that get connected with certain anatomic structures, but are probably much more complex than that, because most things don't reduce to just the things we can measure, right? Like there's things that we can't count that really do count, right? There are important things that can't be counted, that can't be measured. But there's stuff we can measure. So let's just touch on that. You've got a part of your brain, your mind, that is an emotional part of your brain. And it is meant to generate emotion and create arousal, to create a sense of, I need to either connect and love and be doing things that are really meaningful and purposeful, or I need to run away. I need fight, flight, freeze. I need to get away from danger or make myself small and hide and protect myself from danger. And that's the arousal system. That includes your emotions. It's involved with your limbic system, parts of your brainstem, but it's about arousal. And the place where it gets most significant in terms of your health and well-being is that fight, flight, freeze stress response, that protective response, which can be in balance or it can be out of control. Let's say it's in balance for a second. Let's say it's balanced. What's it balanced with? Well, we've got this other part of our brain. Again, this is oversimplified because there's several parts of your brain, but there's something called your left prefrontal cortex. And that's one of the things that's been studied and identified as stabilizing. It's about emotional control. It builds the container. It holds the context. So if I'm sitting with my best friend and I'm triggered to remember something incredibly painful for me, and it evokes a lot of hard emotion for me, I'm with my best friend who I can trust, or I'm with my, whatever it is. So the tears come up and I cry and I talk about it and I emote and I share that from an emotional place because it's okay, because it's a context in which that actually works for me and it builds a deeper connection. It allows my friend or my spouse to empathize with me. It perhaps allows me to empathize with somebody who I'm serving, where I'm working with a patient who's going through some sort of painful experience, and I can actually touch that in my own memory, in my own experience, so I can feel where that person's coming from. That's empathy. I feel with him or her. That enables me to connect and be better, more supportive for that person. So that's balanced. And that's because I have a context. I have a context where I'm safe, or I've got a sense of control or an understanding, or I'm holding my emotional experience in a container and it's not overwhelming that container. I've got a vessel of my mind, my intellect, my understanding, my previous experience with my emotions, so I can feel it and not be overwhelmed by it. So that's obviously much different than if my emotions are much more overwhelming and powerful than this part of my mind that's able to hold them. Because maybe I never developed the skills to relate appropriately to emotion. Maybe I was taught consciously or unconsciously that big boys don't cry. Or maybe I was taught that I'm not allowed to feel fear, I'm not allowed to feel anger. So if I feel fear and I feel anger, I experience that there is a problem. And if I'm wired in a certain way, that creates a stress response. So I have some sort of stressful emotion, and that creates a stressful emotion, which feeds a stressful emotion, and pretty soon I've got an overflowing of emotion. The way I like to think about this as a metaphor is I'm sitting on the bank of the river, and the river is flowing by, and it's the experience of my life. And I observe things in the river. And at one point, something really stinky comes down the river. It's awful, it's scary, it makes me angry, it makes me sad, and I become so overwhelmed by it. I'm drawn into it, and before I know it, I've fallen into the river, and I'm like sucked into it, and I'm lost, and I'm not even there. And that's an overwhelming emotional experience. So what I'm suggesting is that your entire being can be trained to relate with wisdom to your emotional experience, and by so doing, you transform your emotional experience. I'm going to share a few examples or aspects of that. I'm going to share a few perspectives that frame it and give it some degree of understanding about it. And then at the end, if there's a little bit more time, we'll do a little bit of a practical session together. Hang on one second here, I'm just looking at comments. If you have any comments throughout this, let me know. The YouTube comments are live, I can see them. The Facebook comments, I can't. If you're not on the YouTube, if you're on Facebook, go to that YouTube channel, look up Dr. Schiller, Reducing Pain and Suffering by Making Peace with Negative Emotions. You'll come to that live YouTube video, or maybe you'll see the recording. In any event, leave a comment if you've got it. So I'm just going to share a framework for relating to emotions. I'm going to share some tools that I use and that I teach people. And maybe we'll do a little bit of meditation practice together at the end, depending on how long we've gone. I'm trying to keep these things a little bit on the short side so that they're not overwhelming and that people get to watch them. The overall framework that I use, that I teach people, is you could name it slow, no, like K-N-O-W, and flow. And slow means stimulating the biology of calm and quiet. Just like you have a fight, flight, freeze response, you have a relaxation response. And a key part of dealing with anxiety, intense emotion, is generating that biology and generating it on a regular basis. If you're experiencing chronic pain, acute pain, trauma, if you had early life trauma or horrible early life experiences where you were sick at the time when you were born, or you had a really bad illness, you may well have a fight, flight, freeze response that's on overdrive. That's one of the ways our body and mind adapt to really difficult childhood events. It's one of the reasons why people who have adverse childhood events frequently have more chronic illness and chronic pain. But that process of change is a neuroplastic process. It happens through experience. It happens through emotionally charged experience. And so learning to bring on the biology of quiet and calm, to stimulate the biology of the vagus nerve, which is a big, long nerve that serves all of your internal organs and is anti-inflammatory and anti-stress, and that when you stimulate calm, the relaxation response, vagal tone, and all the brain activity that goes along with it, it actually creates a response that lets you think better and see more clearly, that lets you sleep better, that can reduce pain, that can reduce inflammation. And that's slow. Slowing that stress response and training it over time, like if you were trained to be a great violinist or a gymnast, over and over and over again, you train, you practice, you develop a skill through practice, because nerves that fire together wire together. So learning to stimulate that biology is part of the process. I want to share a piece that I meant to say before and I forgot. I'm going to inject it here, because one of the things I've witnessed in my experience as a clinician for over 20 years is that modern medicine is really big on pathologizing things. And there's reasons for it. There's good reasons. We want to have a diagnosis. But we get so caught up in the diagnosis that we're often thinking mainly about what's wrong. And people are saying, what's wrong with me? Give me a diagnosis. How am I broken? And a good doctor is saying, here's how you're broken. Here's your diagnosis. And what I suggest is that you also need to think about what's right with you. You need to think about what's well and where is your health, because you have health inside of you, and it doesn't matter how sick you are. You have health, and your health is a whole set of relationships that's built on your integral connection of all of your organ systems and your heart and your mind and your soul, like I mentioned before. And so building health is part of healing disease. It's not just about treating disease. And most of what I'm going to talk about is building health. Okay, so back to the flow of things, we're talking about slow, stimulating that biology of health and well-being. It's a physiology of health and well-being. It's stimulating that relaxation response, that vagal tone, and all the brain activity associated with it. The second part is knowing. It's awareness. It's consciousness. And consciousness is that part of us that is present and it cares, and it isn't caught up in the drama. And it's sometimes hard to get the head around that without having the experience of it. What I'm talking about is conscious, loving, compassionate presence, which is what mindfulness is meant to be about. But unfortunately, in modern culture where things become a thing, like mindfulness has become a thing, and everyone's talking about mindfulness, but a lot of people train in mindfulness, but they're not really learning to be mindful. They're learning to be mindful, say, of taste the goodness of whatever you're eating and the food, and appreciate your breath, and appreciate the beautiful sun on your face in the morning, the pleasurable mindfulness. It's great. It's really important. It generates a biology of calm and happiness. It builds gratitude. It's really important. I'm not knocking it. What I'm suggesting is that there's this other aspect of mindfulness, which is learning to hold what's difficult. And this is building that container. It's building the vessel that I was talking about before, where we've got these two parts. We've got this emotional arousal generating system in our limbic system, in our brainstem. And we've got this vessel that holds the intensity of our experience. And that vessel is something that you build through training. You build it through training in practices like mindfulness, of not only learning how to appreciate the good, but learning how to taste the difficult stuff. So when we learn how to taste the difficult stuff and realize, you know what, that's not me. That's a difficult experience that I'm having. What happens is you become independent of that difficult stuff. And that difficult stuff might be inside of you. It might be traumatic memories. It might be painful bodily experiences. It might be emotions that feel toxic and hard. But when you start to touch them, because they're there already, when you realize this is here already, let me touch it. Let me investigate it gently. There's a brilliant sage from the 1940s his name was Kalman Shapiro. He was one of the sages in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he perished in the Holocaust. And he writes about this technique in one of his holy books that he wrote that was buried during the war and recovered after the war. And he talks about it as the principle of quieting. And he says very specifically, when you have a difficult emotional state, acknowledge that it's there. Note that it is there. Give it some of your attention, but not all of your attention. Allow it to be there, but give your fuller attention to something that is stabilizing, that's calming, that gives you joy. That's very similar to what you might learn in a mindfulness meditation setting, where you learn to just follow your breathing and anchor in your breathing and touch that difficult experience. Allow it to be there. Notice the quality of emotion. Notice if there's a place in your body where you feel it. Notice if it has a color, a shape. Becoming aware of it as a peripheral object where you're giving it attention and you're caring about it, but you're not sucked into it like that stinky thing in the river that pulls you into the water. And if you do get sucked into it and it wipes you out, then what do? Well, you get out of the water. You climb out of the river. First, you acknowledge you fell in, and then you forgive yourself. Because in my experience, one of the hardest things about all of this is the shame and the blame and the self-judgment. So many people that I've worked with, who I've witnessed, especially if they've experienced early life traumatic experiences, are carrying tremendous blame and toxic shame and self-doubt and self-blame. And one of the most important things to start off with is just like, it is okay for me to not be perfect. And part of that imperfection is having and experiencing emotions like fear and sadness and anger and grief and loss, overwhelm, despair. We're allowed to have those experiences. You're allowed to have those experiences. The question is, what do you do with it? I just watched again a clip from the film Good Will Hunting. I'm not sure if you saw it. Did you ever see that? Make a little note if you did in the comments. So, the basic theme is that there's this brilliant guy, Matt Damon, played by Matt Damon, who's just been through a horrible abusive childhood, and he's like a wreck, and he's angry, and he's destructive, and he meets Robin Williams, who's a psychotherapist, who like really gets him, and he's this cynical, angry, brilliant kid, and Robin Williams is the only person who really like feels him and knows him, and he knows that he knows him. And finally he's met someone he can trust. And there's this point in the show where like Robin Williams is holding his psychotherapy file, and the kid's like, oh yeah, what's in there? And he's like, Robin Williams is like, this is a bunch of crap, but the bottom line is this. And he takes a step towards him and he goes, Will, it's not your fault. And he's like, yeah, I know it's not my fault. And he's like, no, you don't. And he comes closer. It's not your fault. And he's like, yeah, I know it's not my fault. And he comes closer and he's like getting in his face. And he's like, get off of me, man. Don't get so close to me. And he's courageous enough. And he looks at him with eyes of love. Eyes of love. There's no pathologizing. There's no diagnosing. There's no blaming and naming. There's love. He's looking at him, he's saying, son, I love you, and it's not your fault. And as could be predicted, because it's Hollywood, Matt Damon really it breaks through and it reaches him. And it actually touches that intensely defended point inside of his heart that wanted so badly since he was a kid to actually have an adult who he could connect with, that he could trust, that he could open up to. My suggestion is that inside of you, if you're carrying chronic pain, chronic shame, especially if you had early life trauma, there are vulnerable parts, and they need you. They need your adult self. They need your loving adult consciousness that can meet them and relate to them with eyes of love, not with judgment, with compassion, that knows what they've been through, that can say to them, I see you, and I love you, and it's not your fault, and I'm here for you. And what I can guarantee you is that when you start to meet those parts in yourself, and you start to meet your own vulnerable, hurt, emotional, challenging places inside, and you meet them with love, and you reassure them, and you create a consistent, loving presence for them, then they open up to you. Then they start releasing their negative energy. They start releasing the beautiful qualities that may have been lost inside this protective shell. And you start to experience a deeper level of your own being. You start to experience your own vitality in a bigger way. You start to be more open to feeling joy, to feeling potential and possibility and pleasure. It's not an easy road. If it was easy, then we'd all be doing it from the 5th grade. It could be that in decades to come we will be, because I think we have a generation of people who are waking up to this reality of having emotional intelligence and living with emotional intelligence. And so what I'm really talking about here is just acknowledging that we all potentially have exiled pieces of ourselves. And that could have been created during the car accident that brought on your pain. It could have been created during the course of developing a chronic illness. It could have been generated when you were a child. But those exiled parts of ourselves are frequently protected by patterns of protection that clog up our energy and clog up our emotions and prevent us from living fully and potentially feed into the biology of pain and illness. And what I'm suggesting to you is that you can develop this quality of presence, of awareness and compassion. In the Torah tradition, we call it das. Das is consciousness, and das is connection. And what happens when you develop this connection, when you develop this awareness, it becomes much more than just being aware of your physical body and your emotions and your thoughts. It becomes enveloping all of that in the higher qualities of your own divine self, whatever that means to you. It's your capacity for love. It's your capacity for transcendence. It's your capacity to connect to the source of life as you know it. So these are some of the principles or practices that I share with people in various contexts. If this is interesting to you, I encourage you to reach out by email, join my email community, send a message. There's various programs and ways in which I teach these things. We have a every other week free session, which you can tap into by going to mindbodygroove.com. And it's a free Zoom thing where you have to sign up for it, but it's free. And we practice these practices together. And it's great fun, and we have a sweet community that's very supportive. So you're invited to check it out if you like. I welcome your comments to this video. I welcome your sharing it with people you care about. And I hope it's been meaningful for you. So thanks a lot for watching.